Okay, folks, I was watching Eric July's live stream earlier today, and I got one bit of what I guess I could call bad news in that it looks like ISOM number 3, which will finish off the ill-advised first arc of ISOM, is not going to be released until end of the year, maybe even into first quarter of next year, which is kind of sad. I was kind of hoping that was going to be something that finished sooner rather than later. However, I can't say that strategically it's a bad thing because Eric does have two other creative teams working on the two other Rippaverse books that are going to be coming out this year. And so it makes more sense that while he is doing the promoting and stuff of the other two books that he himself is not writing, that he could be writing ISOM number 3 at that time. So, it's kind of hard to be just heads down writing when you've got the campaign for ISOM number 2 to be thinking of, the warehouse move that's got to happen before that, and then you've got these two other books coming out that have to be synced up in a certain way. And it may also have something to do with the way his timeline syncs up, because he's going to have a strict timeline for the Rippaverse in which certain events have to take place with other events. And so you don't get into like timeline snarls or continuity goofs, which is really easy to happen if you don't have good editorial oversight. So it all could be just part of the plan in terms of making sure everything comes out in the correct sequence, as well as not making use of all of the different talents in the most efficient ways. But darn it, man, I really wanted to see ISOM number 3 sooner than that, just because, because otherwise I'm going to have that open book in my OCD, and it'll take until next year to close it. Now, one of the things that I wondered about on account of the long time frame, it made me wonder about decompressed storytelling. And decompressed storytelling is where your writer takes way too long to cover a particular topic. You've got a story that takes 5 issues, but really it could have taken 2 or even 1 to do. Now, does ISOM fall under the category of decompressed storytelling, given that you've got this 96-page issue, and then you're going to have 2 more issues, and it's all covering the same arc? I would say no. And the reason I would say no is because there's a lot that happens in ISOM number 1. Even though it's a single issue, it's still 96 pages, and in those 96 pages, you will have approximately 1, 2, 3, if not 4 comics worth of material in there. Now, by all rights, there should be 4, given that it's 4 times the size of a normal comic. But there's at least 3. I would say that ISOM number 1 does have a beginning and a middle and an end to it, even though it is part of a larger 3-part series. So I would say that structure and is not something that ISOM number 1 has a problem with, and decompression is not one of its flaws. What would be a good example of a decompressed storyline? Basically, damn near anything written by Brian Michael Bendis, and he is like the godfather of decompressed storytelling, even though it's something that's been adopted by many, many, many other writers, so that they're writing mainly for the trades. Decompressed storytelling is a great way to take a story that normally could be done in 1 or 2 comics, but because you know that readers out there are going to be buying a trade paperback that's going to be about 5 issues long, if you can take that story, that single story, and spread it out across 5 issues, well, now you don't have to work quite as hard, because now all you're doing is working to fill the space. You're not actually working to produce any new story concepts. And that has become what I would almost say the Achilles heel of most comics today, is decompressed storytelling. Because if you're taking 5 issues every time you want to tell one story, then consider that there's usually, in a monthly comic, only 12 issues that come out. So let's say you take 5 or 6 issues per story. Well, then over the course of 2 years, you're going to have anywhere between 4 and 6 stories, and that's not a hell of a lot. Famously, Brian Michael Bendis, when he started Ultimate Spider-Man, it took him 5 issues to kill Uncle Ben and 7 issues to wrap up the origin arc of Spider-Man. Now, how long did it take Stan Lee? It took Stan Lee 15 pages in one issue of Amazing Fantasy number 15. I don't even know if it was 15 pages. But that's pretty much, it only took like half of the comic book. There were other stories in Amazing Fantasy 15. That's how short the origin story of Spider-Man was. And moreover, if you look back at a lot of the early Marvel comics, a lot of them were structured so that there were actually 2 stories per book. If you looked at, I think the first issue of Spider-Man, you actually had 2 different stories in the number 1 issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And it might have continued like that for a while. It's been a while since I've read those, but I seem to remember something to that effect. Same thing with the Hulk, I think. And then, of course, you had the books like Tales of Suspense and Tales to Astonish, where you had 2 different headline characters occupying the same book, and you would have 2 stories in every book. But my goodness, you used to be able to pack quite a lot of story into just one comic. Sometimes several stories into just one comic. And now what's happened is the opposite has occurred. Now you've got one story that's spread across multiple comics when it really doesn't have to be. One great example of that was Heroes in Crisis. When I showed how I would have written Heroes in Crisis, it wouldn't have been 9 issues long. It only would have been about 5 issues long, because that's really all you needed to tell the entire story there. So, why is it such a bad thing for these comics to go through this decompression, for there to be so few stories over the course of all these issues? Well, the problem with it is that every time you tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, that gives you one kind of nugget of information about that character that you can now relate to. So if you have a story and your story is X fights Z, if X fights Z and it all takes place in one issue, then with that one issue you know that there was a conflict between X and Z, and you can kind of take something away from the relationship between those 2 characters. And also, if there's anything that happens with the supporting cast in those books, you can kind of take those away as a unit with those characters. But if you're decompressed and you're telling that same story over 5 different issues, then by the time you get to the 5 different issues, you have the same amount of information. And so you haven't learned as much about that character, or it's taken you 5 times as long to learn about that character as you would have if you were writing in a non-compressed style. Or what was it? No, more of a compressed style. Yeah, if you were not writing in a decompressed style, you would have communicated all of that within one issue. And there are still some writers out there who are capable of doing that. And I don't know if they're still doing it today so much, but I know Mark Waid is an expert at that. Christos Gage is an expert at that. John Byrne could tell some, great done-in-ones. Done-in-1 was usually the norm back in the day. Now it's more like done-in-5, if you're lucky. And that's not better for comics, because what that causes is a lack of progress within the stories. You don't get to see your characters develop very far. And then, all of a sudden, it's time for a new writing team. Because it turned out that the writing team that came aboard only really had 1 or 2 stories in them. It just took that writing team 6 or 12 issues to tell those stories. So I'm not I am definitely not a huge fan of decompressed storytelling, and you can see especially the impact of such storytelling on new characters like Kamala Khan, or who is the new Ms. Marvel, or Miles Morales, who is Ultimate Spider-Man, or now the second Spider-Man in the mainstream Marvel universe. When I look at those two characters, I don't feel like I come away knowing very much about them, even though I read the first issue or the first collection of Ms. Marvel back in the day. I don't remember when I read it, but it was several years ago. But because her whole origin tale took the entire volume, I felt like I had read exactly one story about her and came away knowing pretty much nothing. And now I've been reading Miles Morales and his early exploits, and Brian Michael Bendis is the one writing this, and so yeah, it's decompressed all to hell across the entire line of his earlier adventures. And even though I've read 3 years worth of material for Miles Morales, it's like this character still doesn't exist. He's not a well-rounded, well-shaped, well-founded character. Couldn't tell you what any of his interests are. I couldn't tell you if he's got any friends besides the one who he goes to school with. He doesn't have any environments that he hangs out in besides home and school, and other than web swinging around the city. There's such a shallowness to his character on account of the fact that every time a story is told concerning him, it takes about 5 or 6 issues to get through, and that means we've only had a handful of stories of Miles Morales in all of the time that he's existed, up until the point that he gets folded into the mainstream Marvel universe. Now, I'm hoping, like I said in my latest video on Miles Morales, that that's going to change. But if it changes, I think one of the ways that it's going to have to change is on account of an investment in telling more done-in-one stories, where I can see Miles Morales go through a conflict in one issue and resolve it all in one issue, so that I get a sense of who this character is over time when faced with multiple threats. If all I'm going to see is 6 issues to take care of one problem, where nothing else in his world changes, and you don't get to see him interact with really any other characters, it's all just going to come down as not very interesting, because who a character interacts with is largely how you find out who that character is. And in decompressed storytelling, the amount of characters that you interact with throughout the course of that decompressed story is limited to just what that story needs. That's not enough very often. You need a lot of interactions before you can really start to get a feel for someone's personality. And that's why I still haven't gotten a feel for Miles Morales' personality over all this time. So I guess if I were giving advice out there to the creators, whether it's Eric July or whether it's people from Biff Bam Boom Comics, who I recently did a review for, or if it's anyone who just did a decent done-in-one comic in terms of the main concept, the execution I found to be somewhat lacking on it, but still it's a good idea. Or anybody who's planning on getting into the comics business and doing writing, really there has to be a beginning and middle and end for each issue that you do. And so I think that in the cases of the couple of comics that I just mentioned, as far as the Biff Boom Bam and Eric July's ISOM #1, I think that was accomplished. I think there was a beginning, middle, and end to those particular comics. And I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see that people still have respect for the done-in-one. But in the larger universe of DC Comics, Marvel, and such, there's still a lot of decompressed storytelling out there that needs to be reined in favor of shorter stories and things that you can tell a beginning, middle, and end in each comic so that the reader, with each purchase, is making progress getting more into your characters, into your world. And it's kind of sad that it's really the independents who are coming up now who know this, as opposed to the big two organizations who have been around for such a long time, but whose interests, I guess, lie more in the trade paperback market now. Because from what I hear, although I don't listen to a very well-rounded series of sources, the actual comic book market is not doing too well in terms of the singles. So yeah, maybe it would be doing better in terms of the singles if readers knew that they were getting a complete story in the singles every time. Give that a shot. Maybe you'll see some results. I'm Mike Partika. Thank you for watching, and please do subscribe if you haven't already, and I will talk to you later.